Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, it's Giles Whittell from Tortoise. Welcome to the news meeting.
I think the danger here is that we're not as relentless as we were the first time around. We have to keep that up.
Just one newspaper found 30,000 lies or falsehoods or misleading statements during his last term. You know, Trump met the moment here because traditional media is in crisis.
We should be talking about how our reporting is getting into the hands of people and how we're building trust with those audiences.
Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
Hello, it's really nice. We're back. I'm back in London. I'm in the studio with Harriet. Ruth is sadly not with us, annoying.
Ruth is preparing for two massive storms. One which is winds, which is going to whip across the whole of Scotland.
I've got guy ropes. I'm going to go out and peg my house down once we finish recording this pod.
And the other is the political storm, which is Donald Trump. Ruth preparing for that too.
Donald Trump. I can't stop thinking about Melania's hat. I know it's become a meme and I know it's everywhere, Donald Trump trying to kiss Melania, who's protected by her wide-brimmed hat, but I saw it in real time and I was watching it and it made me laugh so much.
I was gripped by the hat, I'm afraid. But I think not only the fact that it kept Donald Trump at bay, which you've got to sympathise with her for, but also because it hid her eyes. So she could be rolling her eyes when he was saying all his bits and pieces and the cameras couldn't see her. But I thought, actually, she looked kind of immaculate.
Do you know, I'm going to give credit to Trump in one respect. He was doing something later on, I think in the White House, and he was behind the lectern somewhere and everyone was there. He was chatting about like all the stuff he had to do and her feet had been killing her because of the heels. They've got lots of walking to do. But they did the like going away thing where you see the previous president onto the helicopter, onto Marine One and wave them off. And he came out with just like the downdraft from the helicopter was so windy, I thought her hat was going to make her lift off. It's like, actually, to be fair to you, Donald, that's quite funny.
We'll come back to Trump. Other topics for today, though, is we're going to talk about Southport and that awful attack on those young girls at the Taylor Swift dance class that has, I don't even have the words to describe how horrific it is. We're going to talk about if there was a cover-up around Southport, the Prime Minister talking about Southport this week. Do we need to redefine terrorism because there's now going to be a public inquiry? The fast-emerging theme of this post-election year seems to me partly to be disinformation, because we're 3 weeks into this pod in the new year and we're talking about it again, aren't we? Disinformation, people distrusting institutions, distrusting what the government and authorities are saying about events that have been happening in the country. And it feels like it's going to be the theme of the year. Now, when it comes to Southport, we saw disinformation fueling those August riots. In the week the killer is sentenced, disinformation's come back right in the face of the PM because he's been accused of a cover-up over what he knew and when. And he did a press conference this week announcing a public inquiry into Southport. How did the perpetrator get missed when he came into so much contact with so many different authorities through the years? But actually, much of the press conference was about whether the government had covered it up, because it was disinformation that fueled those riots. And then politicians are saying the government knew more about this person. They covered it up for various reasons. Was it to try and quell the riots? Was it because of government failings that they didn't want the public to know about in that moment? And when Starmer did a press conference announcing the inquiry, I have to say most of the questions were around this.
There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know and I know that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk the trial would collapse. I'm never going to do that. Never going to do that, because they deserve that justice.
That was the press conference in Downing Street after the Southport killer pleaded guilty on Monday to murdering those three girls. It was Alice, Bibi and Elsie, as well as injuring 10 others. An absolutely unfathomable event. I don't really even know. I can't put it into words. But look, I just want to both ask you, what are your reflections, Ruth?
In terms of that specific question about what did we know that we didn't tell people, I spent over a decade as a journalist before I was a politician, and it's kind of natural for somebody that worked in news to know lots of stuff that you know you're not allowed to say. And you're not allowed to say it not because you're a bad person or you don't want people to know, it's your job to tell people things, but because there are reasons for that. So hearing Keir Starmer say, look, I didn't want the trial to collapse, if a jury of 12 people that came from the area where these girls had been stabbed had heard lots of stuff about this guy's background, if he hadn't pleaded guilty, if it had gone to a trial, if we'd had to hear all the evidence, like, his lawyer could argue he wouldn't get a fair trial and he might not face justice because that's the law of the land.
And the two things which I think are different in this situation, which are very concerning, is that the conspiracy theories are kind of circulated very widely on social media, but they have also been picked up. This is the conspiracy theory that somehow the Prime Minister, who has got no interest in a cover-up, is doing a cover-up. But not just circulating on social media, and there's the responsibility of the social media companies, but also being picked up by the official opposition and by Reform, directly alleging all sorts of things which have just come straight from the swamp of conspiracy theories. And that is a very, very worrying thing.
And this is where, because this is kind of goes to the heart of it, which is there's a whole issue that we need to talk about the inquiry, what went wrong, what needs to change. How did this happen in the first place? How can we stop this happening again? Because as he said at the press conference, it could have been anyone's child. I think it's really upset everyone in the sense of the senselessness of it. And actually, a lot of the conversation has been about what did the Prime Minister know when, and this is where it is a bit murkier. And the question I asked him was, do you acknowledge that if the information had come out that this person had ricin in his room, they also found an Al-Qaeda manual, that if you had said at some point when the riots were going on that there were potentially terror-related charges to be made, that this would have fueled the riots, and therefore you withheld information from the public in order to quell dissent and also not, pour oil on the flames that were already burning around this. And that was the question I asked him, because as you said, Harriet, that's what Reform is saying very loudly. That's what Robert Jenrick in the Conservative Party is saying very loudly, that the government were covering it up, that in previous attacks, be it David Amis, when Joe Cox was murdered, that the two MPs that were murdered, the Plymouth attack, the police came out quite quickly and said this was terror related. And the fact that the police didn't say that, or the government didn't say that when they then charged this person 3 months down the line with a terror offence, that has stoked this idea that there was a cover-up around Southport.
The issue is what information the government had, and obviously they had all the information from the police, but also what information was given out. And it's down to the police who are conducting the investigation to decide what they know and what they feel in consultation with the Crown Prosecution Service. They, the police, can say, we cannot have a situation where, in the face of a terrible crime being committed, the Prime Minister does a running narrative on that.
But there's a question I want to ask here, and that particularly because there are a couple of MPs that are really jumping up and down on this. Farage is one of them. Robert Jenrick's been saying some things that are at the outer edges of getting into conspiracy theories and all of this as well. Is that why if they thought there was stuff that needed said at the time, why they didn't use their absolute privilege to say it. Because they could get away with it if they wanted to. If it was that important to them, if they weren't part of this giant conspiracy that doesn't exist, why could they not do it?
Because the sub judice rule applies in Parliament, and the Speaker will very fiercely police that. If there's a charge that's been made, if there's a trial pending, the Speaker will not let MPs use the privilege of the House of Commons to possibly prejudice or engage in discussion about a criminal case.
And what's the sanction for that?
Being chucked out of Parliament. So basically the Speaker controls what people say, and he will be saying at the start of proceedings there's a criminal case ongoing, nobody's to say anything about it, and if they even start to say it, he will silence them and chuck them out.
Look, I think at the heart of it seems to me, because partly, in a way, if they did withhold information, i.e. let's not put to the public domain that we might end up charging him for a terror-related offence. The reason they didn't call it a terror offence immediately was it was not classified as a terror offence, because a terror-related offence is when the use or threat of violence is used to influence the government or intimidate the public. The purpose of terrorism is to advance a political, religious, racial or ideological cause. And the point is, with this murderer, they couldn't find the intent to make it a terrorist act. You see what I mean? So They charged him with terror offences when they found the Al-Qaeda manual and the ricin that he'd made, but it wasn't a terrorist-related offence because he was looking at this stuff to carry out extreme violence, but not for a religious or political cause. He just wanted to do something really horrific. He was obsessed with violence. So in that way, the motive wasn't terror-related. And I was talking to Martin Brunt, our crime correspondent, about this. You know, they charged him with having ricin and they charged him with the Al-Qaeda manual, but they haven't prescribed it a terrorist event, point one, right? Which is why perhaps they decided back in the summer not to say it was terror-related. The other argument you could say is they found the ricin and actually took a decision to not release that information into the public domain because the country was rioting and they didn't want, the government/authorities, police, didn't want to fuel those riots because they were struggling to control them. There weren't enough prison places. And actually, is that a cover-up or is that just sensible? I mean, what do you think, Ruth? Because a lot of your colleagues, particularly like Nick Timothy, he's now an MP, who was a Home Office advisor, he's very incensed about the fact that they did not release this information about the terror element of some of this perpetrators' actions.
So I think part of this is to do with the government response to the rioting that happened as a response to the stabbings. And I completely can understand if I was in the CPS, so the Crown Prosecution Service, that's having to decide what do we take to court, that the stabbings, the murders, the attempted murders, the conspiracy to commit murder, like you can have all of these other charges that exist on their own. You can have ancillary, so it's things you're charged with at the same time, which is like holding a terrorist training manual, which can be having a substance with intent and all that sort of stuff, that you can get charged with all of that at the same time, but the ricin has nothing to do with the stabbing. It's just, you're a bad guy that wants to do lots of bad things. Here are different bad things that you want to do. But I think where we get into why people are so angry about this is because the way the government acted at the time in terms of opening up the courts, fast-tracking people through them, people that had been protesting and rioting against these little kids being killed in their community, and what they thought about it was there was a feeling of heavy-handedness at the time against them, and that things were stacked against them for standing up for their community. How they feel, now, obviously, burning down a hotel because it's got asylum seekers that have nothing to do with this in it, it's, is a crime in and of itself. But we also get into things like, how come when he was charged and there was a picture of him that was put out there, it was a picture of him as an angelic 12-year-old boy, not the picture that we now see, now he's admitted guilt, which is kind of more like his mugshot picture where he looks like a deranged and crazed killer. Why is it that information of the charges weren't made in real time when it was known what the charges would be brought? So there is question marks about that, and you can ask these questions in a way that's not heated, that's not a conspiracy, but you can ask them.
Just on Rob Jenrick, there was a article in the Telegraph where he floated the idea the government withheld information to keep things calm in terms of the riots. This is what he said: if this was indeed Starmer's strategy, it failed badly because the public could tell they were not being told the whole truth, and that contributed to the anger which spilled into the riots. In the social media age, sunlight really is the best disinfectant. Ruth, have I found for the first time ever something that you and Rob Jenrick actually agree on?
I think that, I mean, generally, do I agree with the point that transparency in sunlight is a good disinfectant? Yes, I do. And I think that in particularly, as we get more and more obsessed with what's true and what's fake, what's real news, what's wrong news, actually transparency is the only way that public bodies can operate, particularly when there's so little trust in them. I also think that after a guilty plea that we weren't entirely sure we were going to get, we thought that there might be a trial here. The Prime Minister moving to have an 8:30 in the morning, the very next day, press conference where he immediately announces a full and statutory public inquiry, that is a move to transparency. I think that there's an understanding that transparency is required here because there is a residual feeling that something funny was going on here.
These moments is when lawyer Starmer comes out, and he's the guy, the CPS, he was the chief prosecutor, and he's so clear in his mind about the decisions he made.
And I think he's set up a public inquiry. All this will be looked into. But the thing which is new and ominous is the opposition and reform fueling conspiracy theories. And we don't want any government to be pushed into engaging in the criminal justice process and them deciding who's guilty and who's innocent.
But given that we are now in an age where part of the government, to get to the actual substance of the policy, have to get through, in the case of what we've seen with the grooming gangs as well, they have to get through disinformation
and they're having a public inquiry,
theories circulating online. Do you think as part of this public inquiry that it should have a section in which it tackles this? What was disclosed when? Why was it done that way?
Absolutely.
And it tackles this idea of, was there a cover-up? Was there disinformation? If only, you think that they will be exonerated, but in a way to try and reassure the public when trust is so low.
I think that would be a very good thing for the public inquiry to do, but I think that the public inquiry's got to get on with it and do it expeditiously. And I think one of the problems has been that public inquiries take years now, but that didn't used to be the case. It's perfectly possible for them to get on and do their job quickly. And I was looking back at the Dunblane massacre, which was, you remember, there was a primary school in 1996 where a man went in and killed a teacher and 16 primary school students, and a public inquiry was set up in relation to a crime that was committed in March 1996, and it concluded in September. It took 6 months, and it looked at the protection for schools, and changes were made. It looked about the surveillance of people running youth clubs, and changes were made. And above all, it looked at licensing for handguns. And then there was legislation after that. That was 6 months. The government should actually lay down time limits for public inquiries and not let them go on for years and years. So like the COVID one, like the infected blood scandal, like the post office one. People want answers much more quickly than they're getting, and it's within the government's power to do that.
I worry for the government where there's already a suspicion, particularly off the back of the grooming gang stuff. And part of the kind of the fury is this lingering sense that there's almost a set of differences in the way people who are from ethnic minority backgrounds are treated, or people who are immigrants, whether that's legal or asylum seekers or illegal immigrants, are treated. Two-tier policing, all of that stuff's all wrapped up in the sense that white working class, and this is what reform is tapping into, this idea that white working class Brits get the shitty end of the stick every single time, and there's special treatment for others, and even others that do bad things like grooming gangs and like this guy. So I think that there is a kind of worry that even though actually it's quite sensible to have restrictions in terms of buying knives online, the idea that Amazon was the problem here, that the first thing the government does is it says Amazon has to change what its rules are, not that this 17-year-old was the problem, and we know he was a problem. He was a violent individual. He'd shown violence in the past. He'd been thrown out of school. He'd been referred to authorities several times. He'd had police come around the house a number of times. And I do just think that in the rush to try and do as many things as possible, the way in which the government tells a story here can make a really big difference into how the public see them and see the systems of this country and see the bodies, the statutory bodies of this country.
But they're not mutually exclusive. You can have the government taking quick action on Amazon, but also the public inquiry looking into all those things you rightly specified.
I mean, after the riot and sort of taking action after the riots, didn't Yvette Cooper also say there would be a review into extremism and misogyny, because there was kind of a lot of young men involved in this? And what happened with that?
So Jess Phillips and Yvette Cooper launched a review into extremism in relation to misogyny. And that is apparently ready and going to shortly be published. But in the meantime, the Prime Minister announced at a press conference that he was going to have a review into terrorism, and that being the foundation of crime. And they'll have to sort out where one ends. And I think what you've got individuals who carry out mass acts of killing where they know the victims, like that terrible case of the BBC's racing correspondent's wife and 2 daughters being killed. Then there are people like Rudakubana, who I assume what we're going to find is, because of what we know already, a very troubled and deranged individual. 5 times his family called the police when there are a number of agencies involved, and it's failed to be stopped. And then there is also organised ideological terrorism groups. And I think those 3 things will have to be looked at separately.
Yes, but the thing about Rudakubana, as you all both noted, and I mean, it's just astonishing when the PREVENT programme, which is the anti-terrorism programme, they looked at him 3 times and decided that they didn't need to carry out surveillance on him because he didn't fit the criteria of terrorism, right? And he also came across the social services, the youth justice system, the police. He was expelled from school. He took a knife into school.
The mental health services as well.
The mental health services. His father, the week before, had stopped him getting into a taxi because he was going to go to his old school where he'd been expelled. And then in this press conference, the Prime Minister said that Rudakubana's violence was a new threat for the country. That's what he said. He said misfits and loners are new kind of perpetrators that have kind of closed off from society, that are isolated. Ruth, do you think that this is new? Because there's been lone wolf operators in my mind, and I can think of horrific crimes that have been carried out.
So exactly. We've already talked about, Dunblane, Thomas Hamilton was a misfit loner who came in with a handgun to a school and killed 16 people and their teacher. One, I don't think the idea of lone agents and actors is new. Where I do agree, and I find myself deeply uncomfortable, I seem to be agreeing quite a lot with Keir Starmer today, is that this idea that the definition of terrorism is all set up through a post 9/11 idea and landscape, and therefore the criteria that we use in terms of monitoring bad and dangerous individuals who may go on and commit future crimes is through, have they been radicalised online? Are they linked to particular prescribed organisations? Are they part of a whole that is trying to instruct them or encourage them to carry out acts of violence, either for something, so for an ideology, or against something, against, for example, the louche and immoral West, which is where we are. And there's a saying in the military that generals always fight the last war. So lots of things are set up for what was the last big threat we faced, how do we combat that, what's worked in the past in that landscape. And then the landscapes change and what used to work doesn't work anymore. And I think that this sense that actually there is now a strong and growing strain of disenfranchised young men. It's got a name in America called the incel movement. So it's involuntary celibate, so wildly misogynistic. Women are the fault of lots of things. They are generally, they have communication between people online. They're very solitary, often don't integrate well within their schools or colleges, etc., sometimes within their families. And part of their violence is not about trying to do something to fit in with an ideology or for the glory of something or to be part of something or to be against something. A lot of it is leaning into that lonerism. It's about being different and separate. And that is where we haven't got the tools, or we haven't got the definition that allows the tools that we know can work against violent individuals and people that are nihilists to do that.
It's not a new threat, but it's newly virally communicated through social media.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kalnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, we're back. Now, look, we've already discussed the American story of the week. I know you're all talking about, which is Melania's hat. But, you know, he also did, President Trump, he also signed about 200 executive orders. He was signing them at the parties. He was signing them in the Oval Office. I want to know from both of you, which of Trump's raft of executive orders are you watching and why? Who wants to go first?
I'm going for 3, I'm afraid.
Oh, 3?
One on immigration, the rounding up of people who are undocumented. One is climate change, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement on climate change, the global agreement. And the third is the question of gender and transgender. And all of those issues are really important for this country and our domestic politics. And what he's doing is going to embolden people who are climate change deniers, who are hostile to all immigration, and to those who want to actually have sexual equality and, proper human rights for trans people. So that's going to mainstream into our politics.
So I think the mass deportation stuff, so there's loads of immigration stuff. He signed a raft of executive orders. So there's stuff like ending birthright citizenship, but also the other one is pausing all foreign aid for certain 90 days and deciding what to do with it, and withdrawing from the World Health Organization. We hope there's no other pandemics that happen in the next 4 years that Trump's in power, but something like the WHO withdrawing from that could have massive implications, not just to the US, but to the rest of the world.
This is exactly the conversation I've been having with people within government. And I think there's a consensus that on cultural issues, that there is an ill wind blowing from the US, and that his actions on trans or his remarks on migrants, it will kind of create an atmosphere here as well, an atmosphere that goes against some of the values of a Labour government.
And they'll need to recognise that, and they'll need to have a strategy to address it. Politically, Trump might as well be sitting in the House of Commons. He is more important than most people's representatives they voted for, and the government, therefore, cannot ignore the effect he's having on politics in this country. And for the things they believe in, which is climate change and human rights, they are going to have to re-argue those, because that's the values of this government.
It may be that Keir Starmer and David Lammy and Yvette Cooper and all these bigwigs that are in the cabinet do not want to respond to Trump or every tweet he sends or every outburst that he makes. But there are 402 Labour MPs, the vast majority of whom are not in government. They are not ministers. They don't have to bind to the government position. They're probably not being given the information flow that the ministers are given about this is going to be our approach to Trump. And he's going to say stuff that gets right up their back on issues that they care deeply about. And therefore you have the situation where you've got all of the people at the top of the government that are trying to not engage on certain issues. And the first question that they're going to be asked in a press conference about some other policy is, do you agree with your MP from, Sudbury South or wherever it is, who says that Donald Trump is an absolute maniac for saying this thing and it's a bloody disgrace and the Labour way is something else? And it's going to be cat and mouse.
Whatever you think about what he's saying, what his policies are, he democratically won that election in a way that he's got really 18 months now until the midterms.
But he's got his right to put those values into his actions on behalf of the American people. Nobody's going to contest that, and he can do whatever he wants and chooses in international affairs. But what he can't do is actually decide on our values and our politics in this country.
For many Labour MPs and Labour supporters, they are going to find this really frustrating.
This is essentially the policy that Theresa May had in the first term, and it didn't work then, and it's going to work even less well now. Because, like we've said before, this is going to be politics speeded up. So if you think of that first term of Trump, can you name me any big pieces of legislation that he passed? I can't really think of any big domestic things that he did. You know, we are already seeing a completely different way of operating at presidential level because he gets what it is now and what he can do in it, and he's also surrounded by a bunch of tex bros that are pushing him to do a million things really fast. So this idea that even the thing that didn't work for Theresa May can just be done again, it'll work this time, it's just not going to work.
Theresa May and Keir Starmer are not the same Prime Minister in the sense that Theresa May had an election, lost an election, was really weakened, and that is not a good position to go in and go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. Whereas Keir Starmer at least goes in with a big majority, is viewed as a winner by Donald Trump, even if he doesn't particularly like Liberals and he doesn't particularly like Labour historically. But there's a sort of understanding that Keir Starmer is Prime Minister and he will be Prime Minister for the time that Trump is in the White House. There's actually kind of calmness from what I pick up within the Labour administration, which is we know what our asks are from the US. We are going to not engage with some of the domestic policies that we know will cause us difficulties, that we are uncomfortable with politically. But it's not just the UK that's facing this. I mean, look at the way in which Trump, or Trump allies, should I say rather, you know, the approach to Canada, like doing down the Liberals in Canada and building up a Conservative candidate, or in Germany. But actually, what do they want? What does the UK government need to get from Trump? What do they care about? They care about Ukraine. They care about the Middle East and that not being further destabilised. And I think that's the trickiest piece of foreign policy for them, actually. I think that's the thing that they're most concerned about, which is whether or not Netanyahu tries to encourage Trump to become more aggressive towards Iran. You know, if there's direct attacks on Iran, what does that mean for the Middle East? I think that's an area where they hope to go in and quietly persuade Trump. But you've got Ukraine, you've got Middle East, and then you've got economy, tariffs, trade deal, and getting drawn into what Trump's saying about wokeism or what he's doing on the border, that does not serve UK interests, and they're going to have to swerve it. And of course that's uncomfortable for Labour.
Well, there's a huge wind about to blast off Ruth's house nearly in Scotland. There is a huge political wind blasting through from Trump, and Keir Starmer will have to batten down the values hatches.
I think you're going to get wound up, Harriet. I predict. I think Harriet's going to get frustrated because he'll do something outrageous.
I think the government's staying
Starmer
calm.
Will just go, we had a very good dinner.
Yeah,
like, what?
The government's staying calm, so I'm going to resolve to stay calm as well.
I need to go and think about Donald Trump some more. I need to go and buy some new hats.
I need to peg my house down.
Maybe if I go to the White House when I do the press conference in a sort of really like power hat, maybe he'll call
Maybe
me
you'll
for
be
a
wife
question.
number 4, Beth. Maybe you'll be wife number 4.
I don't think I can wear the heels.
Yeah, because that's what's stopping you.
That's absolutely what's stopping me, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That's all we have time for, but remember, you can get in touch whenever. Voice note us on WhatsApp to the burner phone 07934 200 444, or email us electoraldysfunction@sky.uk, or send us a picture of a dog in a Beth Rigby bob, if you like, just like Sue in Essex did.
Do you know, I don't think there's any other news and politics analysis podcast that want dog in wig pics. I mean, you really do get something special from Electoral Dysfunction.
You know, my new obsession is watching dog grooming videos online. There's a woman in Northern Ireland. She just puts up these beautiful dogs, and they get groomed, and they look so cute. And then sometimes she plats their little doggy hair. It's like what I do at night. I just watch dog grooming videos. Do you think that's weird?
Yes.
I find it very soothing. I really love dogs. and I like haircuts. So the combination works for me. We'll be back next week, and in the meantime, if you want to follow every twist and turn of Trump's first 100 days, you can listen to a new Sky podcast. It's called Trump 100. It's done by my brilliant colleagues in Washington, D.C., and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Calnett.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.